It began before dawn, when Russian armor rolled out toward a Ukrainian line they thought was weak. The plan was routine: advance fast, crush resistance, and claim the ground. When powerful T-90 tanks led the push, their engines echoed through open fields. However, that sound carried farther than they knew. Ukrainian drones were already keeping a keen surveillance. They were carefully marking each vehicle, every turn, and even every hesitation. The soldiers inside didn't realize they weren't advancing into battle. They were driving straight into an ambush that would shortly turn the field into a graveyard of their own tanks. The armored column moved forward with T-90 tanks in the lead and armored personnel carriers bringing infantry close behind. Commanders expected a straightforward breakthrough: push, clear, and hold. Recon teams watched the formation close from a distance and passed exact coordinates to the Ukrainian command. Within minutes, operators responded. Ukrainian drones climbed and began to deploy. Dozens of explosive drones rose into the sky and headed for the convoy. The air filled with low, urgent buzzing as those strike drones closed on the moving armor. That was only part of the plan. Under the route, crews had already planted anti-tank mines, buried to break tracks and shred treads when the weight passed over them. Ukrainian officers monitored every signal on their screens and waited calmly as the column drove deeper into the mapped corridor. On the Russian side, there was no sign of alarm. The crews kept moving, unaware of how the field had been prepared. Every minute the convoy advanced, the tanks and carriers moved farther into a trap that was being closed around them. The first contact came when a T-90M opened fire. Its crew was confident. The tank pushed forward and sent round after round toward Ukrainian positions. To cover the advance, they released smoke grenades, a gray wall meant to hide them from the javelin operators waiting somewhere ahead. Believing the smoke would blind the defenders, the tank tried to take shelter among a cluster of abandoned houses. Through the mist and debris, it looked secure. But overhead, a Ukrainian drone was already circling, and its camera was locked on the turret. The strike came seconds later when the explosive drone hit square on top. The ammunition inside detonated, and a column of fire lifted from the hull. The crew never had a chance. Behind it, a second T-90M rumbled forward to keep the momentum. The driver steered slightly off the main track, hoping to avoid the same line of fire. What he didn't know was that the ground ahead had been seeded with buried mines. The front end hit one squarely. The blast tore through the armor, throwing pieces of the tank several meters into the air. On Ukrainian monitors, the feed flickered from the shock, then steadied. The two burning wrecks confirmed that the plan was working exactly as designed. The drones had found their marks, the mines had done their work, and the Russian spearhead was breaking apart before it even reached the line. After losing two tanks, the Russian command tried to adapt. They sent forward an armored personnel carrier packed with more than a dozen soldiers. Its task was to move around the minefield, unload the infantry close enough to track and destroy the Ukrainian drone crews, then return for pickup. The APC managed the first half. It crossed rough ground and reached the drop point. Soldiers jumped out and spread through the tree line, rifles ready, trying to close the distance to the operators guiding the drones. On its way back, the vehicle didn't make it. A mine detonated directly beneath it. The explosion tore open the hull and sent metal fragments across the field. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones hovered over the smoking wreck and confirmed there were no survivors inside. The infantry that had been dropped earlier pushed on. They advanced through shattered fences and half-collapsed trenches, moving toward the Ukrainian positions. That's where the actual close fighting began. Ukraine's assault team from the Comfort Brigade moved in to clear the area, house by house and trench by trench. The clash was short, but extremely brutal. Each side fired until the last magazine ran dry. Ukrainian soldiers advanced slowly, calling targets and covering one another. When it was over, reconnaissance counted 8 Russian soldiers in that sector. 4 had been killed in the fight itself. while 4 tried to run across open ground. The 47th Mechanized Brigade was already tracking them through drone feeds. Operators guided FPV drones onto each moving figure. One by one, the drones struck. Explosions flashed through the grass. 3 were killed instantly. Only 1 survived, dropped his weapon, and surrendered. He was captured alive and later used in prisoner exchanges. By the time the fighting eased, Ukraine held the field. The wrecks of T-90s and burned-out carriers lay scattered across the tree line. From drone feeds, Ukrainian officers watched smoke drift through the craters and confirmed that the line had held. The loss was more than tactical for the Russian command. It was a humiliation. Their newest tanks, the pride of their armored divisions, had been destroyed before they even reached the target. Armored vehicles that were supposed to deliver fresh troops were torn apart, and the infantry meant to secure the ground was either dead, missing, or in Ukrainian custody. Instead of slowing the offensive, Russian commanders decided to double down. Orders came to shift focus toward coordinated assaults using aircraft, helicopters, and glide bombs to weaken defenses before another wave of armor advanced. Indeed, it was a way to retake momentum theoretically. However, practically, it meant exposing more of their resources to a defender who already knew the pattern of their attacks. Ukrainian units didn't wait for the next move. Field engineers began reinforcing trench systems, laying new barriers, and recalibrating anti-tank launchers. Western-supplied weapons, javelins, leopards, and Bradleys were repositioned where they could strike quickly and then relocate before return fire. Drone teams operated in shifts, keeping surveillance active day and night. Every patch of ground the Russians might use for another push was already mapped and ranged by artillery. The Ukrainian command had turned the battlefield into a fortified grid by the end of the day. Trenches were deeper, anti-armor zones extended, and drone coverage was constant. On screens across command posts, every new piece of Russian movement appeared as a blip, recorded, timed, and tagged. Nothing ahead would be unknown for the next Russian column. They would be walking into a defense that had already studied their plans and built its reply. Hours later, a new column moved out from the Russian side. Commanders believed that faster movement could beat Ukrainian precision, so the tanks zigzagged along the road, trying to throw off the aim of javelins and artillery. Each vehicle carried extra ammunition and fuel, planning to push straight through once the opening strike cleared the way. The plan looked coordinated on radar, but the terrain told a different story. The lead tank jammed as it tried to maneuver around a crater and stopped dead. The second rolled forward to cover it, only to bog down in the soft ground beside it. Ukrainian gunners saw both through their feeds. Within seconds, artillery coordinates were locked in. Shells rained down, one after another. The first impact tore through the side of the lead tank. The second round hit the carrier behind it. When the dust cleared, both were burning wrecks. Another group of 5 armored vehicles tried to flank the position. They moved in tight formation, hoping speed would help them cross the field before Ukrainian fire found them. A guided missile missed its target, but drone operators immediately adjusted. FPV drones closed in from 2 sides, their cameras steady despite the shockwaves. Consecutive explosions followed, mines triggered under the weight of the last vehicle, blowing its turret clear. The attack stalled. Smoke covered the field as surviving crews tried to reverse, but trenches blocked their retreat, and every pause made them easier to hit. Drones flew low, dropping explosives directly onto stalled turrets and engine decks. Within minutes, all 5 armored vehicles were out of action. Still, new orders pushed the Russians forward. 2 more T-90 advanced cautiously, firing at random positions to keep defenders pinned. They didn't realize that Ukrainian tanks had already taken up positions along the flank. The first Russian tank hit a mine, erupting in fire. The second slowed just long enough for a Ukrainian shell to find it. The hit tore through the armor and left nothing but fire and smoke. Further back, another tank tried to pull out of the engagement zone, reversing toward safety. It hit another mine and exploded, scattering debris across the field. Even the smaller units weren't spared. Russian soldiers armed with anti-tank missiles ran forward and fired 3 rockets in quick succession. Each missed, the shots falling short or veering wide. The Ukrainian tank they were aiming for returned fire and escaped into cover, still intact. When the tanks stopped coming, the Russians tried something new: speed. Small quad bikes tore across the open ground. Riders crouched low with rifles and rocket tubes. It looked fast enough to work for a moment. Then the first drone dropped. The explosion erased the lead bike, and the rest spun in panic. Some jumped off and ran for cover. Others tried to shoot back at the sound above them. Nothing helped. Ukrainian operators kept on tracking every movement carefully and calmly. They were furiously dropping explosives until the shapes on the ground stopped moving. From the drone feed, you could see it all: the trenches, the smoke, the flashes where soldiers tried to hide. The fight that began as an assault had ended as an example. The Russians had brought numbers and machines. Ukraine answered with a wise plan. When the smoke cleared, the line had swallowed the attack whole. Another wave stopped, and another night survived. If you followed this far, you already know that this war isn't decided by headlines, but by moments like this. Stay with us, subscribe, and don't miss what comes next.